Hey everyone, it's Sevy and welcome back to another Genshin video. This time, an early first impressions of Zibai, our phase 2 5-star character, our actual horse lady in the game. And I tested her a whole bunch on the CE server to make this video, and the CE server is not the final version, and even though there may be changes between here and official release, it's very unlikely. So in this video, I want to go over how Zibai works, some important tips and info about her stats and builds and stuff, teams and teammates that I tested, what I think of those, her Constellation overview, and then just an overall first impressions of her performance. And it's a whole bunch, so let's just get straight into it. So before we get into Zibai, I want to do a quick recap on Lunar Crystallize just because it's relevant. So as of now, if you have either Columbina or Zibai on the team, the Hydro Crystallize reaction will be converted into a Lunar Crystallize reaction. And this reaction is going to generate 3 geo turrets that are also called moon drifts. Every 3 times a Lunar Crystallize reaction is triggered, each geo turret will fire, and then this is also referred to in the text as Moondrift Harmony. So the reaction damage from party members is going to be a transformative reaction that scales on EM and crit stats. Its calculation is very similar to how Lunar Charged works, where it considers the stats of the characters that contributed to the reaction. And then, of course, there will be passive talents from the characters involved, where probably gets buffed by things like the Moon Sign Benediction of like Columbina and Zibai and such. And then Zibai herself is going to be a case of her dealing Lunar Crystallize damage directly based off her own talent multipliers and stats. Very similar to how Flynn's and Ineffa work when they deal their lunar damage off of their talents. So now let's jump into Zibai's kit. And she's an on-field DPS, she's a sword user, obviously she's a geo character, and honestly her on-field DPS playstyle, it's not that complicated to understand. So first of all, she has her normal attack talents, don't mind those, she doesn't need them, don't pay attention to them. When you use her skill, however, she enters lunar phase shift mode. And in this state, she gains a Geo Infusion on her normal attacks, and the multipliers for those are going to be in her skill talent, and they're going to be purely based on her defense stat. So she's going to be primarily a defense scaler. Now when you have Ascendant Gleam, which you should be playing her on Ascendant Gleam by the way, the 4th hit of her attack sequence will also deal an instance of Lunar Crystallize damage. So while she's in this state, she accumulates Radiance, kind of like how Columbina accumulates Gravity if you have her. So as she reaches Radiance, when she reaches 70 Radiance, she can use her special skill. It's called Spirit Steed Stride, which is a mouthful, so I'm just going to refer to it as her special skill. And this basically releases a horse and stomps enemies in italic letters. Oh, also, it neighs. So the second hit of her horse deals Lunar Crystallize damage. The first hit is normal Geo, and then the second hit deals Lunar Crystallize damage. Now, she has several ways of accumulating Radiance. For example, she gains 10 Radiance per second that she's in this state. She gains 5 Radiance when hitting opponents with her normal attacks. And then in Ascendant Gleam, she gains 35 Radiance when party members trigger Lunar Crystallize, but this one has a cooldown of 4 seconds. So this state is going to end after 15 seconds or after she uses her special skill 4 times. So that being said, her standard on-field rotation is you press E to enter her state, and then you spam normal attacks, and then you can pop the special skill whenever it's ready or when you want to use it. Now, that's actually pretty straightforward. I'm not gonna lie, it's actually not that different from Flynn's gameplay, and Flynn's on-field gameplay actually involves pressing more buttons, I think, because for him you have to EQ, for Zibai you just have to E. As for her burst, it's just like a one-time thing. You pop it, and then it deals 2 instances of geo damage, wherein the second hit is Lunar Crystallize damage. So if she does her burst while she's in her skill state, it actually extends her skill state by 1.7 seconds. And this, I think, is just to compensate for the animation time. And you can use it whenever. You can use it at the end of her skill state, you can use it during her skill state, but I'm going to talk a little bit more about like her rotations and like my insights and tips on them after the main kit overview. So moving on to her passives. Her passive, the Selenic Adeptus Ascends. When she casts her normal skill, or when triggering the Lunar Crystallize turrets, she gains Moonfall for 4 seconds, which simply buffs the second hit of her special skill, or the Lunar Crystallize hit, by 60% of Zibai's defense. It just buffs it off her defense stat by a bit. And then you can expect this to be active for as long as you're consistently triggering Lunar Crystallize reactions. Like, you don't even need to think about it, it's gonna be there in the background. And then her passive, Layered Peaks Pierce the Clouds, says that other Geo teammates increase Zibai's defense by 15% each. Hydro teammates give her 60 EM each. And here you can already see that it's incentivizing her to have Geo and Hydro teammates, but it's not really restricting her to that. So just think of it as a bonus buff, and you'll see that in her team building anyway. Then she has her Benediction passive, which basically just says that it converts Hydro Crystallize into Lunar Crystallize, but also the amount that she buffs it on is based on her defense, and it's up to 14%, which caps at 2000 defense stat for her. Then she has her Exploration passive, where at night she restores her own energy every 2 seconds in the overworld, which is pretty cool. I kind of wish she did that for everyone else, but she just does it for herself. Alright, now getting into the rotation tips, or at least my comments on her rotations. What you'll probably end up seeing in a lot of like spreadsheets or rotation sheets or calc sheets is her entering her skill state and then doing normal attacks 4 times and then her skill. So it's gonna be phrases like 4 and 4E, which is 4 times 4 normals and her skill. So you're gonna probably be seeing that a lot. But in actual practical gameplay, I noticed that her special skill is pretty often ready even before she reaches her 4th normal attack. Now, I will say that her kit does reward you for reaching her 4th attack by giving you that extra Lunar Crystallize hit at the end of it, which is interesting. However, it's not super essential that you hit that, and especially if you end up getting interrupted or hit by an enemy, or if you need to dash away, then it's very likely your attacks are going to reset anyway and you're not that 4th hit with a Lunar Crystallize hit. So in my opinion, or at least what I've been doing, even if I miss it, it's not that big of a deal because the majority of her damage is really just built into that mega skill horse, you know? So there will be cases where you'd want to pop her skill, her special skill, as soon as it's ready, even if you haven't finished your attack string all the way. Like, for example, if you want to end her rotation earlier, or just want the rotation to go faster, or if the enemy doesn't have a lot of HP left and you just want to finish her off. That horse, that is a nuke. Like, it's huge and it stomps on the enemy. It does easily like 6-digit damage. And there's also the case where if you're fighting an enemy that needs a ton of lunar damage to take down its shield or to stun it, like this guy I was fighting in Stygian Onslaught, then spamming her special skill as fast as possible actually has its benefits instead of trying to wait out her entire attack string. Now, on the other hand, there will be cases where you'll want to space out or delay her special skills. For example, when I was fighting the Legatus Golem and had to use Geo attacks to take down its shield, I actually wanted to try spacing out the special skills so that once the shield was down is when I could pop more of them, so that I wouldn't waste all her special skills on the Golem's shielded form and then save them for when it was stunned, and then the special skills could actually do more damage while it's stunned, and also the burst as well. So that's kind of my insight on it. Like, I'm sure that once she's out and the community can mass test her, then they'll be able to come up with like more optimal combos and such. But for me, it seems to be a case-to-case and sometimes enemy-to-enemy basis how often or how quickly you want to spam out the skill and her burst. I just want to say that it's something that I think can be enjoyed casually, like without thinking too much about it, but also does have room for optimization, which I'm sure the community will discover as they go along. So anyway, I'm just going to razor language her rotation, her kit. Okay, so you set up team buffs, and that's going to involve Lunar Crystallizes for sure. You swap to Zibai, you press her skill to enter that state. Do normal attacks. When her special skill is ready, when you see that horse, press it. It's gonna stomp in italic fonts. If her burst is ready, you can press it. You don't have to. Keep doing that until the horse icon disappears. And then if her burst is ready, then you can use it. But at that point, swap off her, rotate, and then just repeat. She's actually not that difficult to play. I had a pretty fun time playing her. So moving on to the important notes, insights, what we can glean from her kit. You definitely want to prioritize her skill talent. That is where her most important multipliers are. You do want to level her burst talent since you will be using it, but the skill is definitely still higher priority. On the other hand, you don't have to build ER to try to burst every rotation. It's not essential for her damage, but it's really nice when you do have it. I will say though that if you're in a Geo heavy team, it's likely you'll be getting enough Geo particles from the team anyway to comfortably get her burst up every rotation, at worst every other rotation, even if you don't build ER on Zibai. And then no need to level her normal attacks at all. So what we got from Zibai's entire kit, stats-wise, is that she's a defense-focused unit. She also has a crit damage ascension stat. As for EM, what about EM because she's Lunar Crystallize? Well, EM isn't useless as a substat because she will be triggering a lot of Lunar Crystallize reactions, but I would say that there's no need to focus building EM on her inherently into her artifacts or into her weapon or anything like that because you'll have teammates anyway that can buff the team's EM. Now, she will be dealing a lot of direct Lunar Crystallize damage from herself. Geo damage bonus doesn't buff Lunar Crystallize damage that she deals, so it's better to prioritize using a defense goblet instead of a geo damage bonus goblet because that defense goblet is going to increase both her normal geo damage and her Lunar Crystallize geo damage. And then for her artifact set, it's very straightforward. Just slap the Nod Cry on field DPS for her and get that 30% crit rate in Ascendant Gleam. For her weapons, you're looking for weapons that can give crit or defense but don't overcap on crit rate, so you're likely going to be looking for crit damage weapons. And her free-to-play option is Harbinger of Dawn, if you can keep your HP up with a shield or a healer or something like that. And then, as we mentioned earlier, she incentivizes having Hydro and Geo teammates, and we'll get into that in a little bit through her teams. But I will say that sustain-wise, it's really interesting because she is a defense scaling character. She's gonna have really high defense. She's pretty tanky. All right, let's move on to Zibai's teams. Zibai is going to end up needing a Hydro character in order to get your Lunar Crystallize in. She's definitely gonna want the Geo character. And then the last slot is somewhat flexible, but I still am leaning towards that last slot being either Hydro or Geo. Now, I'm going to give you like key teammates or like preferred teammates instead of team templates since she basically has one team template, which is the Lunar Crystallize team. So first, let's talk about Illuga, the elephant in the room. He's there. He's like, address me. So Illuga is her dedicated support, very much like how Gorou is Ito's dedicated support and then became Noelle's dedicated support as well. So Illuga has a lot going for her. First of all, he gives Ascendant Gleam. Second of all, Illuga greatly buffs Zibai's Lunar Crystallize damage. But note that he specifically buffs direct Lunar Crystallize damage that she deals from her talent multipliers, not from the reaction itself, not from Moondrift harmonies. So Illuga is like, in a way, is kind of hard locked to Zibai. And I'm gonna talk more about him in his own dedicated video where I'm making my first impressions for him. His role is basically to buff her Lunar Crystallize damage. Now he can also hold a support set like Silken Moon Serenade to give her EM. However, he wants C2 to use it properly. There are other choices like 2EM because he's an EM scaler and such. Also, you'll find in his talents also incentivizes having only Hydro and Geo teammates. So basically, I tried like Zibai with a ton of different team iterations with Illuga in them, and as long as she's with him, like the dedicated bufferness, like their synergy is very obvious. Illuga is so good for Zibai. Is he a must? Not necessarily, but he's very, very good for her. So if you actually do manage to pick him up while you're pulling for Zibai, then definitely build him. Like, I don't see any reason why not. Okay, of course there's Columbina, and Columbina is really great for Zibai's team, for Zibai's kit. Your premium Zibai team as of now is going to look like Zibai, Illuga, Columbina, and then like a flex slot. So obviously Columbina, she applies Hydro, she buffs Lunar Crystallize damage, she deals her own damage, which can be pretty big. She can also hold Silken Moon Serenade if no one is, but otherwise she can buff her own personal damage with the new artifact set. Columbina is just a really great teammate for Zibai, and put together that Lunar Crystallize stuff, it goes hard. Of course, if you're well versed in Columbina, if you already have her, you probably know all this stuff. But what if you don't have Columbina? Well, of course, your default other Nod Cry Hydro is going to be Aino. I tried Zibai with Aino a whole bunch, and to be honest, it's not even that bad. You are limited by, of course, Aino's AoE on her Hydro. She's not like Columbina, where the Hydro like follows you around. And then Aino can, of course, hold other support sets. And she's very fine for Spiral Abyss, honestly. Like, I think you might have a hard time using Aino to clear Stygian 5, but Aino's like very usable. She's very manageable. It's just a quality of life difference, and of course Columbina deals way, way, way more damage than Aino. Moving on to the not Nod Cry characters, let's talk about Gorou. So even though Gorou is pretty much Ito and Noelle's like best dedicated support, because he buffs defense scaling Geo characters, which Zibai is, then Gorou is actually a pretty good teammate for her. Not as good as Illuga, but you can play Gorou and Illuga. You can use them both to buff Zibai. So of course we're kind of talking about Gorou with Constellations because he's a pretty old character, and if you were dedicated to Geo or if you like the Geo playstyle, it's very likely you do have Gorou already on C6. So at C0, Gorou does already give defense, interruption resistance, which is pretty nice for Zibai to get that whole attack string in, Geo damage bonus, which Zibai will use a little bit of. He can hold Exile or Instructors, he can hold support sets. His C4, it gives a little bit of healing. It's very, very small, but considering that you have a high defense team anyway, that might also generate crystallized shields if you're fighting elemental enemies or have a non-hydro, non-geo unit, non-animo unit on the team, then honestly, it's not that bad. Like, you're very likely not going to die. However, Gorou does incentivize having a 3 geo team. He misses some of his buffs if you don't have a 3rd Geo on the team, so just keep that in mind. I played a whole bunch of Zibai, Gorou, Illuga teams, and honestly, they slap pretty hard. Like, they were really good. The only downside is that Gorou and Illuga, they don't generate a lot of Lunar Crystallize triggers because Illuga doesn't deal off-field geo damage at C0. Take note, at C0. And then Gorou himself, he deals some with his burst, but it's not like a whole lot. And then there's Zhongli. If you want a dedicated sustain, he's a great choice. His shield, of course, has resistant shred that does wonders, and then his pillars can also resonate with the geo turrets, wherein they're going to end up dealing little geo damage together, but that's also going to mean triggering a lot of Lunar Crystallize. Now, just remember that even though that's a big pro in triggering lots of Lunar Crystallize, Zhongli's geo pillar can be destroyed by bosses or if it spawns in the wrong place. So if you don't get his pillar up, you don't get those like resonating geo constructs, which honestly is kind of a waste. In which case, you're mostly playing him for the shield. And then I do actually really like Zibai with Chiori. Now, Chiori, she's not really a buffer. She's not there to sustain. She's there for off-field DPS, where she gets both Tomotos out thanks to the geoconstruct nature of the moon drifts. And I will say that she's pretty good for getting in more Lunar Crystallized triggers. So specifically in situations where you want more frequent Lunar Crystallized triggers, I found that she was pretty helpful. Like when I was fighting the Stygian enemy that needed fast lunar damage to take down its shield, Chiori helped a lot in that regard. She helped take down the shield faster than like the Lunar Crystallized procs that you'd get from Gorou, because I'm pretty sure I was playing Zibai, Illuga, and Chiori. So that's a really good off-field DPS option if you actually do have Chiori. But when it comes to older Hydro units, one thing that I considered was the Yelan Xingqiu, because they are procced by normal attacks, which Zibai does a lot of in her DPS field time. They're Hydro applicators, and they come with a couple other utilities. So when I was considering it, first of all, yeah, there is synergy there because Zibai is a normal attack user, so she can proc their bursts no problem. However, between the two, keep in mind Yelan's buff for the on-fielder is damage bonus, which isn't going to help Zibai a whole lot because it doesn't buff Lunar Crystallize reaction. I actually might advocate here a little bit for Xingqiu because Xingqiu does have interruption resistance and damage reduction with his rain swords. Especially if you're going sustainless, or if you don't have a dedicated sustain, or if you're kind of stuck with Gorou C4 or something like that, then Xingqiu is actually going to offer a bit more comfort. There is the downside of Xingqiu having longer rotations if you're that kind of person, but between the two, I actually kind of preferred Xingqiu. Not to say that Yelan's a bad option. I played with her too, and it was pretty good, but comfort-wise, Xingqiu was my choice. Now, there's also Furina, and here you're kind of looking at the Furina-Xilonen duo, wherein you get Xilonen to be like the team's dedicated healer. These do come with caveats, so let's get into that a bit. Furina, she does have her damage bonus buff, which again doesn't apply to Zibai's Lunar Crystallized damage, so it doesn't help Zibai a whole lot, but it applies to the whole party. So Furina is going to be buffing herself. Whoever your other teammate is, maybe they don't rely as much on Lunar Crystallized damage or on lunar damage, but Furina will be buffing the entire party, which is nice, and she herself can deal a bunch of damage, and her damage is no joke, and she can apply Hydro a bunch to follow around the enemy and proc more Lunar Crystallize. And then Xilonen's there to counteract Furina's HP drain, of course, and shred enemy resistance. However, this only works if you have two non-geo teams on this. So for example, you would need Zibai, Furina, Xilonen, and then like Aino or Columbina, or just someone who is Fek. you know? So that's kind of the restriction that she places on your team building. You can't do Zibai, Furina, Xilonen, and Illuga because then Xilonen's utilities just aren't going to activate. However, if you don't have a whole bunch of Krai units and you do have Furina and Xilonen because they're very good general account pulls, then that's something that you can consider. Another pair is Albedo and Mona. I didn't really play around with this, but I guess I just had to mention them because of Hexerai buffs because they are a little bit better now. And they can work together, but separately, it's a little bit iffy because they don't have each other to do the Hexerai buffing thing. And then the last character I'm going to mention, circling back to Krai, is Ineffa. Just because the Columbina Ineffa wheelchair thing exists, I think it would be a bit remiss not to mention that, especially with how funny like Columbina and Ineffa are together. And I don't think it's much of a problem throwing Ineffa in because yeah, that means you're going to get Lunar charged, but it's not that big of a deal in regards to Lunar Crystallize procs because you still get a whole bunch of Lunar Crystallize procs and then you're getting Lunar Charge procs. And Ineffa, she's a defensive slot, you know, she gives a shield, she also gives EM with her burst, and overall I tried it, it's comfy, it deals a lot of damage, so you know, why not? Those are the different teammates that I did try out with her. I think that there are like other teammates you can consider if you don't have any of these, but these are the main ones that I think worked pretty well with Zibai that you would want to consider, especially if you have them. That was pretty long, kind of just had to go through the different characters a little bit individually, but anyway. Moving on to her constellations really quickly. Zibai C1, she gets max radiance upon casting her skill. So that just means her special skill is going to be immediately ready. And then she can perform up to 5 of them now instead of 4. And then the damage of the first special skill's Lunar Crystallize hit is greatly buffed. And then Zibai C2, she increases the party's Lunar Crystallize reaction damage. And also massively buffs the Lunar Crystallize hit on all of her special skills. So, you know, of course these are all going to be damage oriented. She's already a DPS. What else is she going to do with her constellations? C3 increases her skill talent by 3, which is great. C4 makes it so that her normal attack sequence during her skill state doesn't reset. This is a quality of life to get her to her 4th attack faster if she's staggered or dashes. And then when her special skill hits opponents, her 4th attack's Lunar Crystallize hit gets a big buff. C5 increases her burst talent by 3 and C6 gains radiance faster. So using her special skill will now consume all radiance, but now her special skill damage and Zibai's Lunar Crystallize damage in the next 3 seconds gets elevated. Elevated is a separate buffing multiplier. It gets elevated by 1.6% for every point past 70. So, for example, if 100 radiance are consumed, then it's going to get elevated by 48%. That's kind of a lot. So, you know, her constellations, they're all damage oriented. I'm not really going to give you any calcs about how big any of them are just because this isn't that kind of video or that kind of guide. But I will say that the horse is just, it's going to stomp. It's just going to keep stomping. None of them drastically change her playstyle or anything like that. All right, so to wrap this video up, Zibai's really strong. She's really damn strong when you have her best teammates. It's kind of similar to how Nefer and Flynn's are as Lunar DPSs. And it's really interesting too because I get to test Zibai with what I feel are her premium teammates already, such as Columbina and Illuga. But when Flynn's and Nefer came out, Columbina wasn't out yet. Like, you know how Nefer already had Lauma and she was already really strong with Lauma, but when Nefer came out, Columbina wasn't out yet. So in my Nefer pre-release, I felt that she was really already strong, but she's even stronger with Columbina. In Zibai's case, I already have Zibai, Columbina, and Illuga on hand, and she, oh my gosh, all put together, she's very, very strong. Honestly, I was pretty impressed and kind of surprised, kind of stunned by how good they were together. And it is, again, a good thing that her dedicated support is a 4-star in the sense that you're more than likely to get at least 1 copy of him, but it's also rough because you're not guaranteed to because there's still no 4-star guarantee. So while you're pulling Zibai, you could come away with the C6 Illuga or no Illuga. If you're lucky, then it is easier for you to get her 4-star dedicated support rather than say for a 5-star dedicated support, but then you could also be really unlucky. Of course, Columbina is really, really strong with Zibai, as I mentioned, and Columbina and Illuga are her premium team. But I would say that if you don't have one of them, or if you have neither of them, I'm at least glad that she has a bunch of alternatives that you can play with. From the list that I mentioned, and probably from a few more, maybe I missed a few, they feel noticeably slower in my runs in Spiral Abyss and in Stygian, but they aren't that far behind actually. They still made Spiral Abyss feel quite manageable, under time even. Stygian you might have a hard time with depending on how well your characters are built, but she does have a fair number of other teammates that you can turn to instead. And then as for her gameplay itself, I actually found her fun to play, even without premeditated optimal combos or anything like that. She's somewhat similar to how Flynn's plays in my opinion, and I really like Flynn's gameplay, so I actually enjoyed Zibai's gameplay. The horse was funny. It actually neighs and it's cool. You know, it's throwing a big horse out there. I found the animation quite amusing. And when she has her teammates to help her quickly get those Radiance points, you know, that horse comes out very often. So I enjoyed testing her. I enjoyed making this video. I had a bunch of fun with it. But let me know in the comments what you think about Zibai. If you're pulling her, what teams you're probably going to prepare for her. And good luck on your Zibai pulls. Don't forget to leave a like if you enjoyed this video. Subscribe to my channel for more content, and I'll see you soon. Take care.